Thank you. Thank you very much for inviting me, Benji Eisenberg from PesachIsrael.com, for giving me this opportunity to speak here. And thank you to Nisanel from TorahAnytime.com for taking care of the technical stuff, the recording, and making sure that this could be accessible for the ages. So our topic for this afternoon is the Great Chashmal Controversy, an electrifying discussion. So I'm not sure exactly what you guys were thinking, what exactly is the Chashmal controversy, but first let's talk about the first two things. The first 2 points I want to say are what we're not going to be discussing. What we're not going to be discussing is the issue of turning on electric things on Shabbos, right? The word Chashmal means electricity in modern Hebrew, and one Chashmal controversy might be whether turning on something electric on Shabbos, is Asr, or what exactly the Isser might be. There's a whole controversy about that, whether it's Boina according to the Chazon Ish, or it's Mavir according to some other Paiskim, or Moilid, which is only Isser D'Rabbanan, or Uvda D'Chol. That's a whole discussion, but we're not going to be discussing that. I, Be'ezus Hashem, am working on a book with a physicist, Dr. Yisrael Uri, on that exact topic. So that's a whole interesting discussion. Dr. Uri is a physicist and an inventor. He invented a certain type of laser that's used in fiber optic communications. So it's a very interesting topic, but not our topic for tonight. The other possible Chashmal controversy that you might be thinking of is the controversy of using electricity that was generated on Shabbos or Yom Tov, especially by people who are Mechal Shabbos, whether you're allowed to enjoy benefit from that. If the electric company is making electricity and you're using the lights or the air conditioner, is that allowed? Is that problematic? Some people are very makbid about it. They have private generators so that they don't use electricity from the electric company. That's also what we're not going to be talking about. Okay, so what is the Chashmal controversy that we are going to be talking about? We're going to be talking about specifically the word Chashmal and the use of the word Chashmal in the context of electricity. That's the Chashmal controversy that we're talking about. Now, where the word Chashmal appears in Tanakh, as we're going to see what exactly it means in Tanakh is up to debate. There's a lot of different explanations. And then we're going to see exactly how modern Hebrew decided, we're going to use the word Chashmal to refer to electricity. And then we're going to look at the different reactions amongst the different Rabbanim to that phenomenon of using the word Chashmal in reference to electricity. And we can, we'll bring proofs, this way, that way, some different ideas along the way, and hopefully it'll be interesting. That's what I have to say. So let's start with, the word in general. The word Chashmal is used in the beginning of Sefer Yechezkel. It's actually the Haftarah of the first day of Shavuos. So if you're not familiar with it, it's probably because you fell asleep during the Haftarah, like we all do, right? So that's the first. That's where the word Chashmal appears in Tanakh. In the beginning of Sefer Yechezkel, the famous Maisa Merkava, the vision of the heavenly chariot. He saw this mysterious, fiery spectacle. It just, I could read the first few psukim in Yechezkel just so you get the context. It says, "Vahi b'shloshim shana b'revi b'chamisha l'chodesh." It was in the 30th year on the fourth day of on the fourth day of the fifth month. In the fourth month of the fifth day on the fourth month. And I am in the exile in Babylon on the river Kabor. And the heavens opened up, and I saw visions of Hashem. And on the fifth of the day, that's in the fifth year. From when the king Yehoiachin was taken into exile. This is before the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash. Dvar Hashem Yechezkel ben Buzi HaKohen be'eretz Kazdim al Nahar Kavar. The word of Hashem came to Yechezkel ben Buzi, the Kohen, in the land of Kazdim in Babylon, on the river of Kavar. V'atihi alav sham yad Hashem, and the hand of Hashem was upon him. V'oera, and I saw. V'hine, and behold, Ruach Se'ara ba min hatzafon. There was a stormy wind coming from the north. Anan Gadol, a great cloud. Ve'esh mislakachas, and a fire was taking hold. V'noi galoi saviv, and there was shining brightness around it. Umitoicha, and in the inside, ke'ein hachashmal mitoch eish. There's something like a chashmal inside the eish. Okay, and that's Yechezkel Parak Aleph Pasuk Dalet, and he continues that the word Chashmal appears also a few psukim later in Pasuk Chav Zayin, where it says Vo'era Kein Chashmal Kamari Eish. Again, he says that I saw a Kein Chashmal that looked like a fire. Right, and then again in Yechezkel in Parak Ches Pasuk Beis, right, he sees Vo'era V'hine Dmus Kamari Eish Mimari Masav Lamata Eish. He said I went and I saw, and there was this demus, an image or a form that was Kemari Eish. It was like a form of, it looked like a fire. Mimari Masna Vulamata, from its torso and downwards. Umi Masna Vulamala Kemari Zohar Ke'en HaChashmala. And from its masnav, from maybe its thighs and upwards, it looked like some sort of shiny thing. Mari Zohar Ke'en HaChashmala, like a chashmala. Okay, so what's this chashmal? What's a chashmala? What is happening over here, right? Very mysterious stuff. So the first thing, when you have a question, what does a word mean in Tanakh? The first thing you do is you look at Rashi. And what does Rashi say? Rashi says, Ke'ena chashmal. Rashi says a few different explanations. Let's read it. Rashi says, Chashmal, malach sheshmoi kach. What's chashmal? Chashmal is the name of an angel whose name is Chashmal. And so Yechezkel is reporting that he saw something that was like the color of this type of malach, and it looks like within the fire. That's what Yechezkel is saying. That's Rashi's first explanation, is that the word Chashmal is the name of an angel. And then Rashi says, V'ayid amru, and they also said, and here Rashi is quoting a Gemara, Mesachas Chagiga, Daf Yud Gimel Amid Aleph through Yud Gimel Amid Beis. Ki hamila murkeves, the word Chashmal is a mila murkeves. It's a compound word, meaning, just to bring out the point, usually words in Lashon HaKodesh are made up of 3 sharashim. There is a whole controversy. Sharashim, words in Lashon HaKodesh are made up of sharashim that are comprised of 3 letters. There's a whole controversy exactly how many letters are used, comprise a word, if it's 1, 2, or 3. Right? But usually it's 3. Some people say 1 or 2. That's Menachem ibn Saruk. But usually the most famous understanding of Hebrew etymology is like the Radak and Ibn Janach and other Rishonim that say that sharashim are usually comprised of 3 letters. Right? So the way the Tartmima explains it, and other Mefarshim also explain it over as well. When you have a word that's made up of seemingly more than 3 letters, if its sharash seems to be 4 letters or even 5 letters, so that's usually a sign that there's something going on over here with this word. That this word is not a usual conjugation of a regular Hebrew sharash. Rather, it's a foreign word that was adopted into Lashon HaKodesh, or it's a compound word. So here Rashi is saying that the word Chashmal, which is made up of 4 letters, right? Ches, Shin, Mem, Lamed, 4 letters, is a mila murkeves. It's a compound word. It's made up of two sharashim that are smushed together. In English, it's called a portmanteau. I knew that word from my vocabulary test when I was in high school. Ki mila murkeves. So Rashi says, the Gemara says that it's a mila murkeves. But Amram, when they say, my Chashmal, the Gemara asked, what is Chashmal? Amr Rabbi Yehuda, what is the word Chashmal? Chayos, Eish, Memalales. Chashmal is a here it's like sort of like an acronym, not an acronym quite. It's called a notrikun. It's a notrikun of the phrase chayos eish memalales. So you take the ches from chayos, the shin from eish, the mem lamed from memalales, and then you get the word chashmal. Right? So chayos eish memalales means, let's translate it literally. Even though nothing I say should be taken literally, because we're talking about Ma'aseh Merkava, we don't know what it means, that it's a fire, that it's a chashmal, whatever. But to translate it literally, Chayos Eish Memalales means Chayos Eish are animals of fire. Memalales means that they're speaking, right? Like Mi Yemalel Gevureis Hashem, or Mi Milel Be'Avraham. Right? The word the shorish Mem Lamed Lamed means to speak. Targum Onkelos often translates the word Vayomer as Memalel. Okay. So Chayos Eish Memalales. B'masnis Otana, and the Gemara brings it. In the Brisa it says, what does Chashmal? Chashmal refers to something that is itim chashais v'itim memalales. So a different drash on the word Chashmal. Instead of Chayos Eish Memalales, it's saying itim chashais and itim memales. So chashais means quiet, like eis lachashais means there's a time to be quiet. The itim memales, and there's time to speak. So it's referring to some sort of heavenly being, which is sometimes quiet and sometimes talking. I know people like that. When the dibur is exiting the mouth of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, so this heavenly being is quiet. And when HaKadosh Baruch Hu is not speaking, so these heavenly beings are speaking. Right? And mimalel also, it means to speak, but like I brought the pasuk mi yamalel kavurais Hashem, it also has an implication a little bit, sometimes at least, of giving praise. So sometimes it's giving praise, actively giving praise of HaKadosh Baruch Hu when Hashem is not talking, I guess, whatever that means. And when Hashem is talking, so it's quiet. So that's what chashais is a chash, and mimalel is mal, that's kashmal. Kleimer, Mishabchais u'Mahalales is Hashem. So Rashi says it means it's Mishabchais u'Mahalales is Hashem. It's some sort of heavenly being that is praising Hashem, right? Shabeach and Lahalal are two different forms of praising. We could talk about what that means, but we don't want to get into that. V'tochen shehei Chashmal shem ha'ayin shu korev le'ein Hashem ha'esh. And then Rashi says another explanation. He says the Chashmal could be the Chashmal is shem ha'ayin. It's the name of the ayin. Now the word ayin means color in this context. Okay? There's a few different Hebrew words for color. There's tseva, there's gavan, there's ayin. I actually recently wrote an essay about that in my What's in a Word series. So ayin means color. Shu korav la'in ha'esh. And chashmal is the name of a color that's similar to fire. That's what Rashi says. So basically Rashi has 4 different explanations. Chashmal is either the name of a malach, or it means chayes esh memalales, or it means sometimes chashes, sometimes males, or it's the name of a color. There you have it. That's Rashi. Now, the problem with this Rashi is, first of all, if you look in the old manuscripts of Rashi, this Rashi does not appear. That's the thing. It doesn't appear in the old manuscripts of Rashi. It was put into Rashi in the Mikras Gedolos. In this version of the Mikras Gedolos, it's in brackets, and it says in parentheses, Tosefes Shmuel. I don't know who Shmuel is who decided that he could put things into Rashi, but I saw on alatorah.org, they said that this piece of Rashi is actually just taken from the Radak Sefer HaSharashim on the entry of Chashmal, and they put it into Rashi. Okay, fine, it's very helpful for us. But they did us a favor, but don't think that it's Rashi, it's somebody else. Another explanation that's similar to the first explanation of Rashi is the Rambam. The Rambam in Hilchos Yesodei Torah, Perek Beis, Halacha Zayin, that's the parak that people skip because that's to do with like angels. And the Rambam in Moreh Nevuchim, that's the sefer that people skip because that's to do with philosophy. In Chelek Gimel, Perek Zayin. So the Rambam in those places, and also Medrash Atzilus, which is printed in Eitzer Midrashim, they say that Chashmal is not the name of an angel, but actually Chashmal is the name of a type of angel. Okay, there's like different types of angels. There's Chayos and Srafim and Oifanim. And one of the types of angels is Chashmal or Chashmalim, according to the Rambam and this Medrash Atzilus. Another explanation. We mentioned before that Rashi said that maybe Chashmal is the name of a color that's similar to the color of fire. Okay, so going in that direction, there's a whole bunch of Mefarshim that talk about Chashmal as the name of a color, as a specific color, and what color would that be? So a group of Rishonim, let's say Rav Sadia, starting with Rav Sadia Gaon, Goinim, Rav Sadia Gaon, and Rabbi Yehuda ibn Balam, who's a very interesting character, lived in the 1000s in Spain. In the time of the Rishonim, he wrote a lot on Tanakh and in words and Lashon HaKodesh, one of the early Medaktikim. And Rabbi Yonah ibn Janach, who also lived in Spain 2 generations before Rashi. They all write, Rabbi Yonah ibn Janach wrote a sefer called Sefer HaSharashim, not to be confused with the Radak sefer, which is also called Sefer HaSharashim. But, okay, so the Rav Sadia Gaon, Rabbi Yehuda ibn Balam, and Rabbi Yonah ibn Janach, they all say that what color is Chashmal? It is blue. Okay? Chashmal is blue. Now, what's interesting is that we're actually familiar with blue being a color of a fire, and in fact, a blue fire is the hottest type of fire. I don't understand why. You'll have to ask my co-author, Dr. Uri, the physicist, why is a blue fire exactly the hottest type of fire? There's like a red fire is like the coldest type of fire, and then there's like a yellow-orange fire which is hotter, and then blue which is even hotter. It has to do with like black body radiation and things that are like beyond my. I'm not the one with the PhD in physics, so I have the highest, whatever. So he says it's blue. There's another Rishon on Sefer Yechezkel. His name is Rabbi Eliezer Mibalgansia. Rabbi Eliezer Mibalgansia. It's not in the standard. It's not in the standard Mikras Gedolos, but it is in the Bar Ilan Mikras Gedolos HaKeter, and it's also it's a sefer printed separately. It's a very common sefer for people who are like learning Yechezkel. Rabbi Eliezer Mibalgansia. Balgansia is the name of a place in France. I think it's pronounced like something like Buancy or something like that, but we call it Balgansia because that's how it's written in Hebrew. So he was a French Rishon who wrote on Tanakh. And Eliezer Balgansia says, we don't know what Chashmal is, but we do know that it must be, from context, it must be something that exists in the physical world. And it seems to be something that's like shiny and it looks like a fire, but it has to be something that exists in the physical world. And what Yechezkel is doing is that Yechezkel Navi is saying that whatever it was exactly that I saw, it looks like something that you can understand. It's like a point of reference. It looks like a chashmal. What is a chashmal? I don't know what it is. You don't know what it is. But whoever Yechezkel was talking to knew what chashmal is. He says that if you look in the context, we didn't read all the psukim of the Meisim Rekavan. We don't have to. But if you look at all the things that Yechezkel says, he uses a lot of different mishalim, a lot of different parables, comparing whatever he's seeing to physical items. He mentions Tarshish, which is a type of gemstone, and Lapidim, which is a torch, and Kerach, which is ice, and Nechoshes, which is copper, and Keshes, which seems to be a rainbow, right? So Yechezkel mentions all of these different things that exist in the physical world that we do know what they are. So Rabbi Eliezer Balgansia says that it must be that Chashmal is also something that like we know what it is, or people should know what it is. It's some sort of physical thing that does exist. We just happens to be that I don't know what it is. So that's what it is. That's what Chashmal is. It's something that physical that exists, and Yechezkel is using that as a point of reference and saying, whatever I saw, it resembles this Chashmal thing. Ke'ein Chashmal. But what he does say is that it's something shiny and it's something that looks like a fire. The Abarbanel, if people are familiar with learning Abarbanel, so the Abarbanel, he writes a lot, and then you think about it and like, what exactly did he say? I'm not quite sure. But if I understood the Abarbanel properly, which is a big if, the Abarbanel is saying that Chashmal is some sort of fire without smoke, which he says it's impossible for us to comprehend, but somehow, because it's a fire without smoke that's impossible to comprehend, it's like a mashal for Kadosh Baruch Hu. I don't know exactly what that means, but we put it out there. So those are some of the different explanations of like what the word Chashmal means, just looking at the pasuk and seeing like what do the Mefarshim on the pasuk have to say. Before we get to the electricity aspect, there's one more Mefarish. I just came across this a few days ago, so I wanted to mention this from a commentator called Shadal. Shadal is Rashi Tevis for Shmuel David Lutzato, who lived in Italy in the 1800s, late 1800s. And some people say he was a maskil. Some people say he wasn't a maskil. He was somewhat of a controversial figure. In Italy, people were a little bit more open-minded than they were, like say, in Eastern Europe. So, what was more acceptable in Italy, might be called a maskil in Eastern Europe. But Shadal was certainly an interesting fellow. And Shadal, in his commentary on Sefer Yechezkel, he also writes, like Rabbi Eliezer Balgansia, that Chashmal must be some sort of physical entity because he's using it as a point of reference so that whatever I saw looks like a Chashmal. So it has to be that a Chashmal is something that you can look at and see and understand what it is. But then he says, so what is it? So then he brings from a Christian scholar who has a very interesting chap. He has a very interesting idea. There's a Gemara in Maseches Ksubis. Yeah, I guess the Christian scholar was learning Gemara. Ksubis Daf Samech Zayin Amud Aleph. Okay, the Gemara is discussing the case of a guy whose wife brought into the marriage gold, and the Gemara is trying to figure out how exactly are you supposed to estimate how much the gold is valued in case they get divorced or in case she's widowed, so that the state has to pay her the ksuba, and exactly how to deal with the value of the gold. And the Gemara is talking about different types of gold, and without getting into exactly the whole pilpul of the Gemara mentions something in that context called malal. Okay, and the Gemara says, oh, what are we talking about? We're talking about malal gold. Okay, so what's malal gold? So again, you have a few different mafarshim. What is malal gold? Rashi on the Gemara says malal gold refers to like gold flakes. I think he even uses an old French word that might be cognated with the English word flakes. Maybe, I'm not sure. That's Rashi. But the other mafarshim, namely Tosfos and the Sefer HaAruch, they say that malal refers to raw gold, meaning gold that was just pulled out of the ground and hasn't been purified. So it's like some sort of alloy of like gold mixed in with all kinds of other stuff. So regular gold is like yellow and shiny, and this type of gold is like dirty gold. Maybe it's more brownish, more dull colored. Not quite sure exactly what the point is, but that's a Sefer Aruch and Tosfos understand that malal means impure gold. So this Christian scholar that Shadal quotes says, oh, you know what Chashmal is? Chashmal is related to this malal thing. It's this type of like dirty gold, like not quite pure yellowish shiny gold. It's like it has some sort of other colors mixed into it or something like that. That's what he says. I don't know. Yes, sir.
Yeah, according to your interpretation that you mentioned.
Are you a metallurgist?
No.
Oh, okay, good.
What I'm asking
because
is about
I don't want to be in trouble.
If Chashmal is the color of fire, and it's blue fire, whatever. So what is Yechezkel saying when he says that he sees the Chashmal b'toch ha'esh? He's seeing fire in fire? And this is blue fire, and that's a different color of fire?
It's a good question. I really don't know, but I would maybe say that usually when we think of Eish, we think of red or yellow or orange. So maybe he's saying like I saw like a blue flame inside the like reddish, yellowish, orangish flame. Maybe something like that. Usually the word Eish doesn't necessarily mean blue. So maybe he saw like a blue flame from within a greater fire, which is made up of multiple colors. I don't know. I'm just speculating. Okay, fine. So those are the different explanations of the word Chashmal and how the Mefarshim dealt with it. That's looking at electricity. Okay, so electricity, just going from the other end now. Let's say it like this. The word electricity, okay, in English, the word electricity in English comes from the Latin word electrum, which comes from the Greek word elektron. Okay, what does the Greek word elektron mean? It means amber. Okay, amber is a fossilized resin or sap from certain types of trees, and when it comes out and it gets hardened, and then it's like in the ground for like a long time, and it really solidifies, it becomes fossilized. So it's looked at as a precious gemstone. At least in the ancient times, they didn't realize that it came from a tree. They thought it was like some sort of natural mineral, and they looked at it as a gemstone. So amber is a special type of gemstone. And the word electron in Greek literally means amber, and the word electric in English, right? It literally, the etymology of the word electric in English refers back to this thing, amber. What's the connection? Okay, so the most basic type of electricity, like if you're reading like a physics book on electricity, or you're reading like an introduction to electricity, or you want to read about the history of electricity, so the first type of electricity that people talk about is static electricity, because static electricity was even known to the ancient Greeks. They knew that if you take certain things and you rub it, it can have the property of pulling lightweight objects towards it. Okay, so the way they originally figured it out was if you take amber and you rub amber on the fur of a cat, so then the cat's fur has the property of the electromagnetic property of static electricity, that if a feather flies by the fur, it'll get like sucked into the fur. It'll get attached to it. Right? It can attract lightweight objects. That's the static electricity. So that was the first use of electricity, and that's why the word electricity that we use comes from the word for amber, because amber was how they originally understood the static electricity to work. Okay, now there's something called the Septuagint. The Septuagint, or known also as the Targum Shivim. The Targum Shivim is known it goes to the story of Ptolemy, the Greek king of Egypt, who decided that he wants to translate the Torah or the Tanakh into Hebrew. from Hebrew into Greek, and these scholars got together and they sat down and they translated 70 scholars. That's what's called Septuagint. Sat down, they translated the Torah, or maybe the Tanakh, or maybe the Torah, and then the Tanakh was done later, from Hebrew into Greek, and when they came to this pasuk in Sefer Yechezkel, where it says Chashmal, so it translates the word Chashmal into Greek as elektron. Okay, so whoever was translating this from Hebrew into Greek understood that the word Chashmal refers to amber. Right? That's how they understood it. Yes, sir.
I didn't know it was the whole Tanakh.
What?
The Targum Hashem was the whole Tanakh.
Right, so that's why I said they translated the Torah, and then maybe they translated the rest of Tanakh afterwards, or maybe they translated the whole Tanakh, or whatever it is. There is a book called Septuagint, which is on the entire Tanakh. I don't know how much of it is the original Septuagint, and how much of it is later.
I think it's Megillah. All the Joshas
are only in Chumash, right? Yeah. I don't know.
Oh, it says 72 over there. Everyone says
You're right. Yeah. There's different versions of the story. There's a Misachos Seifrim, and there's a lot to discuss about Targum Shivim. But if today was Yud Tevis, I would talk about it. But it's not Yud Tevis. So what are we going to do? Linguists point to a cognate of the word Chashmal in other languages. There's a language called Akkadian, which was spoken in ancient Babylon, which is written in cuneiform, and it's okay. Let's say this. One of the ideas that linguists have is there's a concept of families of languages, right? Different languages fit into different families. They're not quite the same language, but they're related to each other. So you have like Hebrew and Aramaic and Arabic. They're not quite the same language. They're absolutely not the same language, but they are very similar. They share some shirashim. They share certain rules, right? So they're all put under the umbrella of Semitic languages. Right? So there are a few other Semitic languages that exist out there, and one of them is called Akkadian. And in Akkadian, which is this language that was used in Babylon in ancient times, it was before Aramaic became the lingua franca of the ancient world. In Akkadian, there's a word called El Meshu, which means amber. Okay, the word El Meshu means amber, and linguists want to say that the word Chashmal is related to this word El Meshu. Like the ches could be like a he, right? So El Chashmal and El Meshu. So it sort of has the same consonants. It's sort of in a slightly different order, but that's how linguists want to say it, and so that sort of supports the idea that the Septuagint translated Chashmal into amber, because we also find the word Chashmal in a similar language. It's not quite Chashmal; it's El Meshu, but it also means amber. So sort of that supports their what the Septuagint did. And I even found, I did a little bit of research on this right before Yantif, and I found that in modern Estonian, which is spoken in Estonia, there's a word, I don't know how they pronounce it, but it's at least written Helmes, Helmes, which means amber. That was thanks to Google Translate. Okay, so there is this word which seems to be related to Chashmal. It's the same exact consonants as Chashmal, just in a slightly different order. I don't know. There's a Professor Chaim Tawil from Yeshiva University who wrote a lexicon of Akkadian, and he brings a lot of different parallels between Hebrew and Akkadian. And the Epic of Gilgamesh is also written in Akkadian. It's a Babylonian tale that people used to say in ancient times. And there's a whole story with Gilgamesh where the Babylonian goddess Ishtar proposed to marry him, and she offers him a chariot that's made of lapis lazuli, which is a blue gemstone, and the wheels are made of gold, and the horns of this chariot are made out of El Meshu. Okay, so you see, like El Meshu it fits in that context of like being with like gemstones, amber, gold, that type of thing. The only problem is that like El Meshu, you have the lamed before the shin, right? And in Chashmal, you have the shin before the lamed. So this is a known thing in linguistics. It's called metathesis, where consonants could sort of switch their place within a word when the words diffuse and go into different languages and different places. So like they're not bothered so much by that. But what I found interesting is that, and then I found there is a dictionary, a scholarly dictionary called the Kohler, Baumgartner, and Richardson Lexicon of Hebrew, which points out that maybe the word Elmishu is also related to Chalamish. Right? And there, in the word Chalamish, which also uses the same consonants as the word Chashmal, you have the Lamed before the Shin, as opposed to Chashmal, where you have the Shin before the Lamed. So, I'm not sure. And Chalamish is also a type of stone. They say flint stone. I don't know. That's from from the Stone Age. But I'm not sure exactly what type of stone Chalamish is. But maybe I don't know. I'm not sure. That's just an interesting thing about the history of the word Chashmal, how it's understood to refer to amber. And this is going to come into why the word Chashmal refers to electricity in modern Hebrew.
I don't know if this adds anything to your discussion, but
everything adds something to the discussion.
Amber is also very similar to the word ember in English.
It could be,
which is
like a type of a fire. The truth is that I didn't write this down. 1 second. The English word amber actually comes from Arabic. It comes from the Arabic word inbar, which is actually nowadays a popular Israeli girl's name, Inbar. I actually dealt with a few Inbars this past year. I had a lawyer named Inbar, a person who was doing some computer work for me, her name was Inbar. So it is a popular Israeli name. Just the nun in Inbar becomes an M in English. It doesn't. I don't think English gets it directly from Arabic. I don't remember exactly the whole etymology, but I have to look it up in the Oxford English Dictionary. Yes, sir.
So if the Septuaginta translated Chashmal as amber, okay?
Yes.
So how does it come that the Rishonim are calling it all different kinds of things, including blue?
Right. I mean, even in the Rishonim themselves, we find multiple opinions, right? So this is just another opinion. What exactly Chashmal means? So they say so the Septuagint says amber, and the scholars, the linguists, want to say that we see proof from that, from I don't know, proof or support from that from Akkadian. I don't know. It's maybe yeah, maybe no. Maybe they're right. Maybe they're not right. I don't know. But what does happen is because the Septuagint translates Chashmal as elektron, so comes along a Maskilic poet named Yehuda Leib Gordon in the late 1880s. He's also known as Yalag for the people who are holding in the Maskilic literature. Yalag comes along, and Yalag says, there's this new modern thing called electricity. It's in the 1880s, this is like the time of Thomas Edison, and he says, what are we going to call it in our modern Hebrew language that we're trying to, Ben Yehuda was also starting to start his campaigns about supporting, spreading modern Hebrew. What are we going to call this new phenomenon? Let's call it Chashmal. Because, after all, in English, it's called electricity, and we know that the Septuagint translates Chashmal as electra, so let's call it Chashmal. Right? So that's how in modern Hebrew, and Ben Yehuda accepted that, and the what's it called? The Academy for the Hebrew Language, accepted this, or what was the precursor to the Academy of the Hebrew Language, accepted this, and they decided that the word for electricity is going to be Chashmal because the Septuagint says it like that, and I don't think they didn't know about Akkadian back then, but that's what they decided. I don't think they knew about Akkadian back then, but that was their decision, and that's why nowadays in modern Hebrew the word for electricity is Chashmal. Okay, so that's the story behind the word. Now we're going to discuss the reactions. Right? How did different Rabbanim react to this? How was it used? And a few other different ideas. So just before we get to that, so my first book is called Lashon HaKodesh, History, Holiness, and Hebrew, published by Mosaic Press, first published in 2014. And in that book, I have a whole chapter called The Language Wars. And the Language Wars discusses the introduction of modern Hebrew in pre-state, I guess, Palestine, here in Eretz Yisrael, and the Maskilic push for spreading Hebrew as the national language, let's say to replace Yiddish or to replace other languages that Jews were speaking in wherever they might have found themselves, and the different reactions that especially the old Yishuv here in Eretz Yisrael had to that campaign to spread this modern version of Hebrew, which is not quite, Lashon HaKodesh. It has, it has some changes, but it also has some. In some ways, it's a continuation of Lashon HaKodesh, and in some ways, it's a break from Lashon HaKodesh, right? So modern Hebrew has that sort of tension. You'll say, oh, all languages evolve, all languages change. So if Lashon HaKodesh changes, so this is the new Lashon HaKodesh. You could look at it that way, or you could look at it and say, no, Lashon HaKodesh is Lashon HaKodesh. This is something new. We have to reject it. So there's different ways of looking at it. So in that chapter, I have a whole lengthy discussion. But there was a cherem that the Sephardi Bezdin in Yerushalayim put against Ben Yehuda. There's all kinds of different reasons why the Rabbanim in Eretz Yisrael were originally against modern Hebrew, because modern Hebrew has a lot of foreign influences, because they change or they change the meaning or pronunciation of words, or because they use holy things for unholy purposes, either the language itself or specific words, right? So that's in general, in a nutshell, that's the whole discussion of modern Hebrew and its reception. So what about the word electricity? So in modern Hebrew, the word electricity, the word Chashmal means electricity. Some people say. We'll start with the most extreme way of saying it. Okay, this is the Pupper of Rabbi Yosef Greenwald, who has a sefer called Vayagid Moshe. So Rabbi Yaakov Yechezkiyahu Greenwald has a sefer called Vayagid Moshe, and he was the Pupper of, and his son Rabbi Yaakov Greenwald writes in the introduction to his father's sefer that you should not use the word Chashmal in reference to electricity, because it's a shanda to use such a word, which originally referred to some sort of elevated metaphysical spiritual entity. It's a shanda to use such a word for some ordinary physical phenomenon or reality that you use every day. Right? To take something holy and use it for an unholy, not unholy, but a non-holy purpose is considered a chilul. You're being machalal it, you're defiling it, you're taking something that was up there and you're bringing it down here. You can't do that. He said,
Why is it different than Eish?
What?
Why is it different than Eish?
Why is it different? Right, but in Tanakh, the word Eish is also used for a regular fire. Right, but here in Tanakh, the word Chashmal is only. But you're right. You're right. But I'm just explaining the mindset. But the word Chashmal is only used in this context. Chashmal and Chashmala, which we had in Perek Ches Pasuk Beis. These are the only 3 times that the word Chashmal appears in Tanakh. It doesn't appear anywhere else.
Does he say what you should use?
What?
Does he say what word you should use?
He does not. But we'll see other people. They're just going to go with the standard Electrica or something like in Yiddish and German and in other languages, like some generic. It doesn't have to. One of the things that motivated the people who fashioned modern Hebrew was we want to give every word has to have a Hebrew flavor to it, right? So we want it to sound Hebrew. We don't want it to have a foreign sound. It's they could have also said Electrica, right? But nowadays the Academy for the Hebrew Language has sort of shied away from that ideology. So you have words like banana doesn't sound like that's pretty blatantly English. Or discon, which is a discon key. Discon. It doesn't. You're not even pretending that you're taking a Tanakhic word or whatever. But back then, they were more trying to resurrect Hebrew. Let's say. So the Puparov was against using the word Chashmal, very strongly opposed. Rav Shmuel David Monk, who was a very interesting fellow. We don't have time to talk about him much, but he was a Yeki and he was a Rav in Haifa, but he is also associated with Neturei Karta. So very interesting mix. And he was also very against Chashmal. He has a tshuva about it. He was against using the word Chashmal. And other Rabbanim were also had different reactions, similar reactions. I found. This is golden. Yisrael Zev Gustman, he wasn't known as anti-Zionist. Yisrael Zev Gustman, it's reported, he was also very careful not to use the word Chashmal in reference to electricity. And when he was living here in Eretz Yisrael, and he had to write a check to the electric company payable to, he didn't write Chavrata Chashmal, he wrote Chavrata Electri. It's a beautiful anecdote. The only problem is that I I can't really cite my source for this because it's a comment on Sfarim blog. So but other than that, this is just a beautiful anecdote. Rav Chaim Kanievsky, has a whole tons of Sfarim were written. It's like a whole genre of Sfarim written where people wrote questions to Rav Chaim Kanievsky, and Rav Chaim Kanievsky has one or two answer writing back. So there's a sefer called Shelas Rav where they ask Rav Chaim Kanievsky, should you use the word Chashmal in reference to electricity? And Rav Chaim Kanievsky says, better not to. So there's this whole opposition to using the word Chashmal in reference to electricity, and then basically we're going to see there's basically three reactions. There's the opposition, then there's the people who say it's not a problem at all, and then there's the people who are going to say, yeah, it wasn't nice for them to do it in the first place, but b'diavad, post facto, we could accept it. All right, so who are the people that say not a problem? So I mentioned before the Puparov. So the Puparov, he wrote a very harsh thing against Chashmal. And somebody named Rav Yisachar Dov Goldstein, who was Rosh Yeshiva of Yeshivas Chug Chasam Sofer here in Yerushalayim, and he was a member of the Badatz Eidach Haredis. He was actually the first cousin of my grandmother, so we're sort of related. Rav Yisachar Dov Goldstein, he writes a letter back to the Puparov, and he says, no. It's not a problem to use the word Chashmal in reference to electricity. Because the word Chashmal in Tanakh, it's not strictly a spiritual entity that now by using it in reference to electricity, you're defiling the word. No, what it is it's a physical entity that Yechezkel was referencing as sort of a metaphor or a point of reference to some sort of higher spiritual vision that he was seeing. But the word Chashmal itself, it's not. It itself is nothing spiritual or metaphysically holy or whatever or elevated. It's just a point of reference to refer to something else. Right? It's similar to what you were saying, Rabbi Marx, right? But not quite the same idea. Right? So Rabbi Yisachar Dov Goldstein in his tshuva. I think it's called Ohle Yisachar or Ohle Yisaschar, maybe. I don't know. So he says that using the word Chashmal for electricity is not called defiling the word. He does say that it's probably inaccurate to say that when Yechezkel said Chashmal, he's referring to electricity. He says it's probably inaccurate, but it's not called a defiling Lashon HaKodesh or making a Chil Hashem or something like that. That's not. He doesn't. He says it's not you don't have to take it that far. It's at least not more so than other modern Hebrew words where modern Hebrew would redefine a word or slightly alter exactly its meaning from the original Lashon HaKodesh. That's what Rabbi Yisachar Dov Goldstein says. The Lubavitch Rebbe Zatzal also has a letter about this. It's printed in Igris Kodesh, volume 11. Okay, this is letter 3741. If you ever want to look it up. Okay, so the Lubavitch Rebbe also says that there's no problem using the word Chashmal. He says that even though the Gemara seems to say that the concept of Chashmal lies beyond human comprehension. There's a Gemara that talks about there was this kid who was darshaning about Chashmal, and then suddenly a Chashmal came and killed him or something like that. So the Lubavitch Rebbe says even though the Gemara says we can't understand what is Chashmal, it's beyond human comprehension, the concept that Yechezkel is trying to convey, but that doesn't mean that the word itself becomes forbidden. The word itself is just a word, so you could use that word, reference to electricity. So the Lubavitch Rebbe was fine with it. Rav Menashe Klein, who's also a very interesting figure, in Shalos Teshuvos Mishnah Halachos Chelik Vav Siman Tzadik Hey, he also says it's not a problem. He brings other people who also hold that using the word Chashmal is also not a problem. So you have the people who say that it is a problem, the people that say it's not a problem, and then you have the people in the middle who say that I would not recommend taking a word from Tanakh and then applying it to technological innovation and saying let's use that word instead, right? Or not instead, or for that innovation. But once you did it, okay, and it became accepted socially. It became a linguistic phenomenon. That's the word that we use. So we could use that word. That's the position taken by the Chazon Ish and Rosh Zalman Auerbach. Both the Chazon Ish and Rosh Zalman Auerbach in their works on halacha, when they talk about electricity, so they use the word Chashmal in reference to electricity. So you see that they were basically fine with it. It should be noted that Rav Zalman Auerbach, when he was younger, he actually wrote a sefer about electricity in halacha even before the Chazon Ish was ever printed. This is back in the 1930s, and in his sefer it's called Me'orei Eish, And in his sefer about electricity and halacha, Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach does not use the word Chashmal. He uses the word electrica instead of Chashmal. Right? So I don't know if that's we could see, we don't know why Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach did it like that, but it seems that when he was younger, he did not want to use the word Chashmal, and then when he was older, all his tshuvas that he wrote about electricity and stuff like that, in his later life, he did use the word Chashmal. So that's an interesting point. Another interesting point is that in my book, I talk about the Chazon Ish's position on modern Hebrew in general, and there were some, I call them rabble rousers. They were trying to go to the Chazon Ish and try to convince him we should oppose modern Hebrew or whatever. This is like in the 1950s. So the Chazon Ish said, he gave a famous mashal about a general who was very successful in a battle, very successful in war. He led his nation in war, and it was very successful, and they won. And then 20 years later, that same nation is in trouble again. They have another war, and this general, he's already an older man, is retired, and they want to say, come back, let's fight the same war. Right? It's like the general's like, what do you mean? It's a different war. It's not the same. It's not the same battle. It's a different battlefield. There's different borders. There's different enemies. You can't make the same fight over again. So that's what the Chazon Ish said about the modern Hebrew. In the 1920s, maybe in the 1930s, when the old Yishuv was fighting against modern Hebrew because they felt that it was, it might cause people to go off the derech, it might cause, different things to happen, and they felt threatened by it, so they fought against it. But nowadays, in the 1950s, there's a state of Israel, things are different. You can't fight the same war again. It's a different war. It's a different battle. If you want to put your focus into something, so there are other things to focus on besides language policy. So the Chazon Ish did give his support to different places that did yeshivas and stuff that did teach in modern Hebrew as opposed to in Yiddish. So you see that the Chazon Ish, at least on a b'diavad level, was accepting of modern Hebrew. So we also see that he was also accepting of the word Chashmal, even though there were people that were very against it. Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach himself, Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach himself writes. It's like this. There's somebody named Rabbi Rachmiel Fried of Dallas, Texas. He's a Rosh Kollel in Dallas, Texas. He's famous for a sefer called Yom Tov Sheni Ba'alacha, and he writes. He has a sefer called. I didn't bring the name of the sefer. Madani Shleimah. Rabbi Rachmiel Fried of Dallas, Texas, has a sefer called Madani Shleimah of different things that he discussed with Shlomo Zalman Auerbach. And he said that he heard from a famous Jewish educator that you're not supposed to use the word Chashmal in reference to electricity because secular Jews have redefined the word away from its original holy meaning in Sefer Yechezkel. So you're not supposed to use that word. Right? That's what Rabbi Rachmiel Fried asked Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach. So Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach said, no, it's not a problem. And Rav Shlomo Zalman said that first of all, it's a description of something. It's a description of something holy. It's not the holy thing itself. So like even if it's talking, even if like the Ma'aser Merkava is like talking about Hashem, it's not actually talking about Hashem himself. It's not Chashmal is not a word that refers to Hashem. It's a description. It's a descriptive. It's an adjective. Let's say, right? It's not really an adjective, but it's a noun that's used as an adjective to describe him. It's not actually a word for Hashem or a word for something holy. So it's not a problem. And Rav Shlomo Zalman even said that there was a big tzaddik in Yerushalayim whose name was Rav Shmuel Aaron Yudelovich, and Rav Shmuel Aaron Yudelovich, he wrote a book about electricity in halacha, and his book is called Ha-Chashmal L'Or Ha-Halacha. And from the title of the book itself, you already see that Rav Shmuel Aaron Yudelovich held that you're allowed to use the word Chashmal, Ha-Chashmal or Ha-Halacha. It's the name of the sefer even, right? So Rav Shlomo Zalman said it's not a problem to use the word Chashmal. Who's this Rav Shmuel Aaron Yudelovich? If you're not familiar with him, Rav Shmuel Aaron Yudelovich was born in 1907, and he was nifter in 1979. He was a brother-in-law of Rav Eliashiv. So he was another son-in-law of Rabbi Aryeh Levine, the tzaddik of Yerushalayim, right? What's it called? The tzaddik in our times, the biography? Yeah. So he was a son-in-law of Rabbi Aryeh Levine, and he was the father-in-law of Rabbi Aryeh Finkel from the Mir. So Shmuel Aaron Yudelovich, people might not have heard of him, but he was definitely big stuff. So he wrote this sefer HaChashmal or Halacha. Now, if you look at the sefer HaChashmal or Halacha in the introduction, he actually talks about this whole topic. Shmuel Aaron Yudelovich points out first of all, he's justifying. First of all, he mentions that he heard from somebody named Rav David Baharan, who was a big Talmud Chacham in Yerushalayim, also not so famous anymore, but in his time he was very famous. Rav David Baharan, Rosh Shlomo Zalman was very close to David Baharan as well. Rav David Baharan said you should not use the word Chashmal in reference to electricity. Okay, and Rav Shmuel Aaron Yudalovich is disagreeing with Rav David Baharan. So Rav Shmuel Aaron Yudalovich, in the introduction to HaChashmal or Halacha, he writes that, first of all, what is the word? What's the problem? The word? So he says, what's the problem? The word Chashmal means an angel. Is the name of an angel. Okay, so let's look at the names for other angels, other names for angels, and let's see if we use those names for in reference to other things. So we said, what are the names of different types of angels? There's Chayos, there's Oifanim, Ishim, Srafim. Okay, what does Chayos mean? Chayos can mean a type of angel. It could also mean a wild animal. Ishim can mean people. It could also mean a type of angel. Oifanim can mean wheels. Also mean a type of angel. A Srafim can mean a snake or a serpent, and it could also refer to a type of angel. So even if Chashmal is like a reference to like a type of angel that's high, lofty thing, whatever, but it doesn't. It's not a contradiction to say that Chashmal can also refer to some sort of mundane, physical entity that we can see, right? So he says, I'm not bothered by saying using the word Chashmal in reference to electricity. It's no different than other words for angels that we also use for different types of in different contexts to refer to something that's not an angel. So he's not bothered by that, right? Yeah. I wrote this down in my notes. I don't know if I should say it or not, but maybe I should say it. It reminded me of an interesting anecdote that I heard way back in 10th grade. There's this. The question is if I should say the names of the people involved. Let's not say the names of the people involved. There was once an asifa of a bunch of important rabbanim, and a lot of people came, spectators came to watch the asifa, and there was a Hasidic Rebbe, and there was a Litvish Rosh Yeshiva, Rebbe, whatever you want to call him, that was there, and the Hasidic Rebbe was speaking, and after the Hasidic Rebbe finished speaking, so he got up to leave. And once he got up to leave, so all his Hasidim who were in attendance, they also got up to leave. But when his Hasidim got up to leave, it was a whole crowd. The Jews started pushing and making a whole mess, and a whole situation. So the Litvish Rosh Yeshiva was caught on a hot mic. They didn't have the term hot mic back then, but it was on a hot mic that had been left on because he was, I guess, the next speaker or something. And he didn't realize it was on the mic, and he muttered under his breath, "Chayos." So then the rabbi turned around, he went on his mic, he said, Chayos HaKodesh. Yeah. Now you know why I didn't say the names, but okay. The point is that the word Chayos can have multiple meanings. The word Chashmal can have multiple meanings as well. It could refer to an angel, it can also refer to something physical. He's not saying it does mean electricity, that the word in Tanakh means electricity, but that it's not a shanda, it's not like a defiling of a word to use it for electricity as well. Okay, that's Rav Shmuel Aaron Yudalovich. What he does mention, Rav Shmuel Aaron Yudalovich, is that because Rav David Baharan said that you shouldn't use the word Chashmal in reference to electricity, so he said that originally I had this very interesting hakpada, that when I would write the word Chashmal, so I would write it Ches Shin Mem dash Lamed, because it was like a holy thing. So even if I was using it in reference to electricity, but I don't want to write out the word Chashmal, all four letters juxtaposed to each other, so I'll put like a dash in between to like sort of separate it. Like when somebody writes like kale, so they put an aleph and dash lamed, right, or something like that. So he said originally I used to write the word Chashmal like that. Yeah, his name, right? Nisanel. At the end of the name, so some people they don't want to juxtapose the aleph and lamed of the theophoric element of the name Nisanel, so they put a dash in between the aleph and the lamed. Right, which is a chumrah, which it's interesting, but I don't know if it's necessary. You actually do that?
Yeah.
Interesting. Okay.
When I write it. So
Shmuel Aaron Yudalovich writes that it used to be that because of David Baharan said not to use the word Chashmal, so I was at least makbid not to write the word Chashmal, all four letters straight. I would put like a little dash in between the mem and the lamed. But then when he said that, but then when I came to the conclusion that like using the word Chashmal is not a problem, like we said, because just like chayis can mean two things, so chashmal could also mean two things. So then he says, we love that right. So then I decided, I don't have to put the dash and it's beseder. So then he stopped putting the dash in between the word, the mem and the lamed. Interestingly, the Orchos Rabbeinu, which is, let's say, a compendium of different hanhagas, different behaviors and practices that the Stipler Goyin had. So the Orchos Rabbeinu brings down that the Stipler Goyin, Rav Yaakov Yisrael Kanievsky, he would also not write the word Chashmal out straight, all four letters, Ches, Shin, Mem, Lamed. He would also put a dash, but he wouldn't put the dash between the Mem and the Lamed at the end. He would put the dash in the middle. So he would have Ches, Shin, and then dash, Mem, Lamed. Which is very interesting because that sort of like harkens back to the Gemara that we mentioned before. What does the word Chashmal mean? So Chashmal means like sometimes Chash and sometimes Mal. So you have like Chash, Mal. Like the two things with the dash in between the Chash and the Mal. That's a very interesting thing. Okay, so there's all these different reactions to the use of the word Chashmal. We had the opposition. We had the people who said it's not a problem. We had the people who said, post facto it's beseder. One of my hobbies is I like to read old periodicals, old Torah journals from the last century and a half or so. All kinds of interesting shtiklach Torah, political things, rants, letters, Mazel Tov announcements, all kinds of very interesting things in these old Torah journals. So one time I was reading an old journal called Kovetz HaMaor. Kovetz HaMaor was printed in Yerushalayim, in Brooklyn. The editor was Rabbi Meir Amsel, and I came across an interesting discussion in a volume from 1972, where I don't know all the details of this whole controversy, but apparently there was somebody named Rav Moshe Pearlstein, and he was a teacher in the Munkach Yeshiva in Brooklyn. And somebody went on this whole rant and he was besmirching this Rabbi Moshe Pearlstein and saying that this Rabbi Moshe Pearlstein, he is a Tzioni, he is a Zionist, he is not really true to the true Haredi ideology. Munkach is known for its anti-Zionist perspective. The Satmar Rebbe was he considered himself like a student of the Munkach Rebbe. So somebody was besmirching this Rav Moshe Pearlstein. Why? Because he uses the word Chashmal in reference to electricity. So he is not really who he says he is. He is really a Tzioni. Right? So somebody wrote this whole thing against this Rav Moshe Pearlstein. And in response, the editor of Kovetz HaMaor, Rabbi Meir Amsel, he wrote a whole defense saying what are you talking about? Right? You're making up new chumras out of nothing. You coming. What are you? So he made two main points. Okay. The first point that he makes is that he says, just because the word Chashmal in Tanakh might refer to something holy, that doesn't preclude that same word from being used for something that's not holy or even unholy, right? Even unholy. Unholy is the opposite of holy. Right? Even something that's like mamish evil, like the avi alves of Tuma. You can use the same word for something that's very holy and something that's mamish, the exact opposite. Case in point. And this is a good point. None of the other people that I talked about before mentioned this point. This is a beautiful point. The word, one of the names that we refer to Kadosh Baruch Hu is Kel, right? Aleph Lamed, right? But the word El is also used in reference to Avodah Zarah, right? Micha Moicha Bo'elim Hashem, right? Who is like you amongst the Elim, O Hashem, right? So the word El in that context refers to Avodah Zarah. So you have a word that can refer to Kadosh Baruch Hu on one hand, and all the way Lahavdil on the other hand, it can refer to Avodah Zarah. The same word, right? The same thing with the word Elohim, right? We refer to Kadosh Baruch Hu as Elokim, yeah. And then there's also a phrase Elohim Acherim. It's the same word being used in reference to Kadosh Baruch Hu, same word being used in reference to Avodah Zarah. We had this morning in the Kriyas Torah, we said, Elohim lo yisekalel. It's usher to curse an Elohim. What's Elohim? It's a judge. So it's a human being, right? The word Elohim can also refer to an angel. So you have, in the linguistic terms, it's called polysemous. You have words that can be polysemous. They have multiple meanings. Right? So Chashmal can have a holy meaning, right? What did I write over here? Chashmal can have a holy meaning, and Chashmal could also have a mundane meaning, an evil meaning. Mincha's 5:30, right? Okay, so we have time. It can also have a mundane meaning. So I'm not bothered by the fact that using the word chashmal for electricity. That's not such a bad thing. The word el can also refer to any powerful entity. Yes, sir. You're asking a question?
Is there a link between the meanings, like Elohim, Hakadosh Baruch Hu, or a Dayan? But there's a link that the Elohim referring to a Dayan is one that has smicha.
Okay. So that's exactly what I was squinting my eyes at here. What did I write over here? I wrote over here that the word El and also the word Elohim, just to say it very bekitzer, can refer to anything that's powerful, right? Kaharare El, right? It's like a godly mountain. What does it mean, a godly mountain? It's like a big, strong, big mountain, right? Something like that. What does it say about Nineveh? It's I forgot the language, the verbiage. Ir Gedolal Elikim, or something like that. Like so a judge has certain power invested in him by the judicial system that he can make decisions. Hashem has ability to make decisions, and Avodah Zarah, people will say that it has ability to make decisions. Yeah, let's say it like that. Okay, there's other words that are also used for very holy context, and they're also used in mundane context. Merkava, right, is used in the context of a Kadosh Baruch Hu's holy chariot, whatever exactly that means, right? And it's also used, it's a wagon. In modern Hebrew, it's also referring to a tank, right? I think it's used for a tank. A type of tank, okay. And the word kisei, right? The kisei HaKavod, the holy throne of a Kadosh Baruch Hu, right? And then there's also a kisei, like can you bring me a chair so I can sit down, right? So it's a kisei, and then there's a kisei. It's different. It's the same word. Right? So it's not a problem. So Rameir Amsel says, in the same way, I don't think it's a problem, for somebody to take the word chashmal and use it. Chashmal means something holy in Yechezkel. It could mean something not holy. If you want to use it for electricity, I don't think it's such a bad thing. Right? And on the other accusation, the guy said, "Oh, this Rabbi Pearlstein, he's a tziyoni," right? Okay, so Rabbi Abzel makes another point. He says, first of all, if you look, even if you go to Yerushalayim, you go to Meir Sharim, you read the Pashkevilim, you will find every once in a while that even the Pashkevilim of the Eidach Haredis, of Badat Eidach Haredis in Yerushalayim, they will sometimes use modern Hebrew neologisms. They will use modern Hebrew words or phraseologies, right? And nobody would ever accuse that rabbinic body of being a tzionim, right? Nobody would say that, right? So, Elamai, right? So what does it mean? It means you can oppose the idea of Zionism, whether that's a good thing or whether it's not a good thing. That's not what we're getting into. But the point is, you could oppose it and still freely use their linguistic innovations, right? That's not a problem. And he says, Horaya, I'll bring you proof. Okay, Chazal were very much opposed to Hellenism. Yes, everyone agrees with that. Right? That's all. The whole Hanukkah is all about that. The Torah Shabbat. We're certainly opposed to Hellenism and Greek culture and Latin culture, Roman culture, and yet Chazal, Mishnayos, Gemara, it's permeated with language from Greek and from Latin, right? Many foreign words from Greek and Latin that are not from Lashon HaKodesh. They entered Lashon HaKodesh, right? It's used in the Gemara. It's used in the Mishnayos. Androgynous, Sanhedrin, Afikoimon, Sandik, Pargoid, Pamalia, the Pamalia Shamala, right? Reference to like the heavenly, the cast of characters up in Shemayim. So the word Pamalia is actually a cognate of the English word family. It's Familia Shamala, right? Familia Shamala. So Rav Amsel says that just because this person was using a word that was innovated or introduced by modern Hebrew, that doesn't make him a tziyoni. You can't say it like that. So he says it's not a problem. On the other hand, Rav Moshe Stern of Debrecen in the Shalos Teshuvas Be'er Moshe in Chelik Beis in his introduction, he actually says the exact opposite of this. He says no. First of all, I don't think there's a problem. He says. He says, I don't think it's a problem to use the word chashmal in reference to electricity. Like we've been saying, a word can have multiple meanings. It can have a holy meaning. It can have a mundane meaning. I don't think that, from that angle, I don't think it's a problem. That's what Rabbi Stern says. But he says, but what I do think is a problem is, since it was introduced by Zionists or by people who are promoting modern Hebrew, by Maskilim, so because it has that ideological association, so I think it's a problem, and therefore the Be'er Moshe, he says you're not supposed to use the word Chashmal. And he himself, in Chelik Vav, I think it's Vav and Zion, in the Shelah Shujus Be'er Moshe, he has a bunch of responsa about electricity and halacha, and he calls it Kuntris Electrica, Kuntris Electric. He doesn't call it Kuntris Kashmal, because he holds it's a problem. So we have all these different opinions over here going on. There's just one last note. This is way above. I'm not 40 years old yet, so I didn't learn Kabbalah, but there is a sefer on Kabbalah from somebody named Rabbi Kusiel Fish, a contemporary Kabbalist. He wrote a sefer called Sod HaChashmal, and he has a whole disclaimer in the beginning of the sefer where he says, I'm not taking any ideological sides. Modern Hebrew, Ben Yehuda, whether he's right, whether he's wrong, yes or no, whatever. But he wants to say that it could be that, according to Kabbalah, maybe the word Chashmal actually does mean electricity. He's saying, I'm not arguing on all these Chashav Rabbanim, and he brings sources that say that compare the Chashmal in Yechezkel to thunder or lightning, and he says that, we know that lightning is an electrical phenomenon. That's, Ben Franklin with his kite and the key, we learned about that back in grade school, right? So he says that, lightning does somehow have to do with electricity, and we find that the Rishonim do connect Chashmal with lightning, so, maybe there is something to this idea of Chashmal being related to electricity, with like a million disclaimers saying that, I'm not trying to take any sides. That's an interesting source if you want to look it up. Thank you very much. Oh, yes, sir. 1 second.
Just add that if you say the interpretation of the word Chashmal refers to the color of fire being blue,
yes,
an electrical arc is usually blue or purple.
I wouldn't know. I don't look at electrical arcs. I try to keep my eyes away from them.
That's the reality, though.
I know.
If you say that what Yechezkel saw was a blue electrical arc within the whatever the context of that fire, it could all fit together.
That could be. Yes, sir.
And that maybe Hashmal is kind of elevating our understanding of electricity in the same way that Elohim elevates understanding of judge.
I didn't say that, but this Rabbi Kusiel Fish is sort of going in that direction. Yeah. Any other? You have a question? Okay.